The moment Jessica walked across that stage to receive her real estate license, she turned to the packed auditorium and announced into the microphone that she couldn't have done it without her mentor Brad, who had guided her through every challenging property law and market analysis. She blew him a kiss from the podium while I sat in the third row, holding the custom study app I'd spent 3 months coding just for her exam prep. 8 months of late-night study sessions, flashcards I'd programmed by hand, and practice exams I'd formatted perfectly for her learning style. All forgotten in that single moment when she credited someone else entirely for her success. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Ryan, and for 8 months, I believed I was helping the woman I loved achieve her dreams. I thought I was building something meaningful while she built her career. What I didn't realize was that I was just the free tech support she needed until she could access the real connections that mattered in Austin's booming real estate market. It all started during a particularly brutal Texas summer when Jessica enrolled in her pre-licensing courses at Austin Community College. I was working as an IT specialist at a downtown startup, spending my days troubleshooting code and my evenings wondering if I'd ever find someone who appreciated both my technical skills and my dedication to helping others succeed. Jessica seemed like that person when we met at a coffee shop near campus, her real estate textbook spread across the table, frantically highlighting sections on property disclosure laws, with a look of complete overwhelm on her face. She was stunning in that effortless way that comes naturally to some people. Long auburn hair that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the cafe windows. Green eyes that seemed to sparkle when she talked about her goals, and a smile that could make you forget about everything else happening around you. More importantly, she had this infectious enthusiasm about transforming Austin's real estate landscape, about helping families find their perfect homes in a city that was growing faster than anyone could keep up with. When I offered to help her organize her study materials using some digital tools I could create, her face lit up with genuine gratitude. She told me she'd always struggled with traditional studying methods, that she was more of a visual learner, who needed interactive ways to absorb information. Within a week, I'd built her a comprehensive study app that turned Texas property laws into interactive quizzes, market analysis into visual charts, and contract terminology into engaging flashcard games. Jessica was over the moon about the app. She called me her study savior, her academic guardian angel, and insisted on taking me out to dinner at one of those trendy restaurants in the Domain to celebrate. That night, as we shared appetizers and talked about her vision for her real estate career, I found myself falling deeper into what I thought was a mutual connection. She spoke passionately about wanting to specialize in luxury properties, about building relationships with Austin's most influential developers, about creating a client base that would trust her with their most significant financial decisions. What impressed me most was her work ethic. Jessica would arrive at my apartment every evening after her day job at a local marketing firm, armed with her textbooks and a determination that seemed unshakable. We'd spread her materials across my dining table, and I'd watch her tackle complex real estate scenarios with a focus that was genuinely inspiring. When she struggled with mathematical calculations for property valuations, I'd create simplified formulas and input them into spreadsheets that would do the heavy lifting for her. When she had trouble memorizing the different types of deeds and their legal implications, I'd design memory games that made the information stick. Our study routine became the highlight of my days. I'd finish work at the startup, stop by the grocery store to pick up her favorite snacks, and prepare my apartment for another productive evening of helping Jessica master another chapter of her coursework. She'd curl up on my couch with her laptop while I sat on the floor with my own computer, constantly updating and improving the study tools based on her feedback. Those quiet hours, punctuated by her excited exclamations when she finally understood a difficult concept, felt like the foundation of something real and lasting. Jessica had a way of making me feel like I was essential to her success. She'd text me throughout the day with questions about property management laws or mortgage regulations, and I'd research the answers immediately, often creating additional study materials to ensure she had every angle covered. When she scored perfectly on her practice exams, she'd celebrate by cooking dinner for both of us. She's telling me stories about the beautiful homes she'd visited during her weekend open house tours, describing the architectural details and neighborhood, characteristics with an enthusiasm that made me fall in love with her vision. But there were subtle signs I should have noticed, details that might have warned me about what was really happening. Jessica would sometimes mention Brad, senior agent at Hill Country Realty who had offered to mentor her through the licensing process. She'd describe him as incredibly successful, someone who specialized in multi-million-dollar properties in Westlake and had connections throughout Austin's development community. Initially, I was happy she had professional guidance. I assumed my role was to provide the academic support while Brad offered industry insights. Jessica would occasionally cancel our study sessions, explaining that Brad had invited her to networking events or property showings that were too valuable to miss. She'd return from these events energized and full of stories about the impressive people she'd met, the stunning properties she'd toured, and the business opportunities that seemed to be opening up for her future career. I supported these cancellations completely, understanding that building professional relationships was just as important as passing the licensing exam. What I didn't realize was how drastically our dynamic had started shifting. Jessica began treating our study sessions more like tutoring appointments than collaborative learning experiences. She'd arrive with specific questions that needed immediate answers, expecting me to have researched solutions to her challenges without discussing them together first. The conversations that had once flowed naturally between us became more transactional, focused exclusively on exam preparation rather than the personal connection I thought we'd been building. I convinced myself that Jessica was simply stressed about the upcoming exam, that once she passed and started her real estate career, we'd have more time to focus on our relationship. I doubled down on my efforts to support her, staying up late to create even more comprehensive study materials, researching market trends that might appear on her exam, and even attending some of her networking events to show my support for her professional goals. The licensing ceremony was held at the Austin Convention Center on a crisp October morning. Jessica had passed her exam with flying colors, scoring in the top 5% of test takers statewide. I was incredibly proud of her achievement. Knowing how hard she'd worked and how much dedication she'd shown throughout the 8-month preparation process, I'd taken the morning off work to attend the ceremony, wearing my best suit and carrying a small congratulatory gift, a leather portfolio, engraved with her initials and the date of her licensing. As Jessica's name was called and she walked across the stage, I felt a surge of pride and anticipation. This was the moment that would mark the beginning of her real estate career, and I hoped a new phase in our relationship where she'd have more time and energy to focus on us. I was already planning how I might celebrate with her afterward, perhaps with lunch at her favorite restaurant followed by a walk through Zilker Park, where we'd spent so many weekend afternoons reviewing property law scenarios. But instead of acknowledging the months of support I'd provided, instead of recognizing the countless hours I'd invested in her success, Jessica used her moment at the microphone to thank Brad for his mentorship and guidance. She spoke eloquently about how his industry expertise and professional connections had been invaluable to her preparation, how his insights into Austin's luxury real estate market had given her the confidence to pursue her dreams, and how grateful she was to have such an experienced mentor supporting her career launch. I sat in that auditorium seat holding her congratulatory gift, watching the woman I'd spent 8 months supporting give credit for her success to someone else entirely. The custom study app on my phone, filled with hundreds of hours of work I'd done specifically for her learning style, suddenly felt meaningless. The late nights I'd spent researching practice exam questions, the weekends I'd dedicated to improving her study materials, the genuine care I'd invested in her success, none of it seemed to matter in that moment when she was publicly acknowledging her gratitude. After the ceremony ended, I approached Jessica with her congratulatory gift, expecting at least a private acknowledgement of everything we'd accomplished together. Instead, she barely glanced at the engraved portfolio before setting it aside, her attention completely focused on Brad, who had appeared beside her wearing an expensive suit, and that confident smile that seemed to come naturally to successful people in Austin's real estate scene. placed his hand on her lower back with a familiarity that made my stomach drop, and Jessica leaned into him as naturally as if they'd been together for years. Brad looked me up and down with the kind of dismissive assessment that wealthy people give to those they consider beneath their notice. When Jessica introduced me as her study partner, he offered a limp handshake and a patronizing smile before immediately turning the conversation. You're back to business opportunities and potential client referrals he could provide for Jessica's new career. I stood there holding the portfolio I'd carefully selected, watching them discuss luxury property listings and exclusive networking events as if I'd become invisible. The drive home from the ceremony was excruciating. Jessica spent the entire time on the phone with Brad, discussing which real estate firms she should consider joining and which neighborhoods would be most profitable for someone just starting in the luxury market. When I tried to suggest we celebrate her achievement with dinner, she waved me off distractedly, explaining that Brad had arranged for her to meet several influential agents at an upscale restaurant downtown. She asked me to drop her off at her apartment so she could change into something more appropriate for the business dinner. That evening, while Jessica was networking with Austin's real estate elite, I sat in my apartment staring at the study materials we'd used for months. The custom app I'd built for her seemed to mock me from my computer screen. Thousands of lines of code representing hundreds of hours I'd invested in someone who had already moved on to more valuable connections. I found myself questioning every interaction we'd shared, wondering if her enthusiasm for our study sessions had been genuine, interest in learning, or simply appreciation for free technical support. The next few days brought a series of increasingly painful realizations about where I actually stood in Jessica's life. She stopped responding to my text messages with the same enthusiasm, offering brief replies when she bothered to respond at all. When I called to congratulate her again on passing the exam, she seemed distracted and hurried, mentioning that she was busy setting up meetings with potential mentors and touring different real estate offices around Austin. I discovered through her social media posts that Jessica had already decided to join Hill Country Realty, the same firm where Brad worked. The announcement photos showed her signing paperwork in their gleaming downtown office, surrounded by successful-looking agents who welcomed her to their team. Brad appeared in several of the photos, his arm around her shoulders as they posed beside expensive property listings and architectural awards displayed throughout the office. The captions talked about exciting new beginnings and grateful partnerships, but made no mention of the months of preparation that had made her success possible. What hurt most was realizing how systematically Jessica had been replacing me in her professional life while I'd been focused entirely on supporting her academic success. She'd been attending networking events and building relationships with established agents throughout our study period, using the confidence and knowledge she'd gained from our sessions to impress people who could actually advance her career. Every evening I'd spent helping her master property law concepts. She'd been applying that knowledge to conversations with Brad and his colleagues, building the foundation for opportunities I'd never be able to provide. My role as her study partner had apparently ended the moment she received her license. Jessica stopped asking for help with continuing education requirements, stopped seeking my input on real estate market analysis, and stopped including me in conversations about her career goals. The transition was so abrupt that I began to wonder if our entire relationship had been nothing more than a convenient arrangement for her to access free tutoring and technical support. The isolation became overwhelming when I realized that Jessica had never truly integrated me into her social circle or future plans. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During our months of studying together, I'd assumed we were building something that would extend beyond her licensing exam. I'd imagined attending real estate events as her partner, celebrating her first sales commission together, maybe even helping her establish her own agency someday using technology solutions I could develop specifically for her business. Instead, I found myself completely excluded from her new professional world. Jessica's Instagram stories showed her attending luxury property tours, industry conferences, and networking dinners where everyone looked polished and successful in ways I'd never be able to match. She posed confidently beside multi-million-dollar homes in Westlake, attended exclusive events at Austin's most expensive venues, and seemed to effortlessly navigate social situations that would have left me feeling completely out of place. The breaking point came when I tried to schedule a simple coffee meeting to discuss how our relationship might evolve now that she'd achieved her licensing goal. Jessica's response was a carefully worded text message, explaining that she needed to focus entirely on establishing her real estate career, that she wouldn't have time for personal relationships until she'd built a solid client base and proven herself at Hill Country Realty. She thanked me for all my help during her study period and suggested we reconnect once her professional situation had stabilized. That message made it brutally clear that I'd been categorized as a temporary resource, rather than a permanent part of her life. The woman I'd fallen in love with, the person I'd supported through every challenging aspect of her licensing preparation, had essentially discarded me the moment I was no longer useful to her immediate goals. 8 months of genuine care and dedication had been reduced to a polite thank you message and a vague promise to reconnect sometime in the future. I spent the following weeks replaying every interaction we'd shared, searching for signs I'd missed about her true intentions. The romantic dinners I'd thought were dates had probably been convenient meals while she picked my brain about study strategies. The evenings she'd spent at my apartment, curled up on my couch with her textbooks, had likely been nothing more than free tutoring sessions in a comfortable environment. Even her expressions of gratitude, which had seemed so heartfelt at the time, now felt like calculated responses designed to keep me motivated and available for continued assistance. The worst part was discovering how deliberately she'd kept me separate from the professional relationships she'd been building throughout our study period. While I'd been focused on helping her master real estate concepts and exam strategies, she'd been cultivating connections with people who could actually influence her career trajectory. Brad and his colleagues had been evaluating her potential as a luxury agent, while I'd been evaluating her progress through practice tests and flashcard reviews. My friends and family, who had watched me invest so much time and energy in supporting Jessica's goals, began asking uncomfortable questions about where our relationship was heading. My coworkers at the startup noticed that I'd stopped talking enthusiastically about Jessica's real estate preparation, that I no longer spent lunch breaks researching market trends or developing new study tools for her use. When they asked about her licensing ceremony, I found myself struggling to explain why I felt so empty about what should have been a celebration of her success. The loneliness was particularly acute because I'd structured my entire social calendar around Jessica's study schedule for 8 months. I'd turned down invitations from friends, postponed personal projects, and dedicated my free time exclusively to supporting her academic goals. Now that she'd moved on to her real estate career without me, I found myself with empty evenings and weekends, surrounded by study materials and technical tools that no longer served any purpose. Most painful was the realization that Jessica had never seen our relationship as I had. While I'd been falling in love with her intelligence, ambition, and seemingly genuine appreciation for my support, she'd been evaluating my usefulness as a study resource and nothing more. The future I'd imagined for us, filled with shared celebrations of her professional achievements and continued collaboration on her career goals, had apparently never existed outside my own hopeful imagination. 3 weeks after Jessica's licensing ceremony, my coworker Marcus pulled me aside during our lunch break and asked if I'd seen the Austin Business Journal feature on rising stars in local real estate. The article included a full-page profile of Jessica, complete with professional headshots and quotes about her innovative approach to luxury property marketing. What caught my attention wasn't her success, which I'd expected, but rather how she'd completely rewritten the story of her licensing preparation. According to the article, Jessica credited her rapid mastery of real estate concepts to an intensive mentorship program with Brad and several other established agents at Hill Country Realty. She spoke eloquently about the value of learning directly from industry professionals. It's about how hands-on experience touring properties and analyzing market trends had been far more valuable than traditional classroom. The article made no mention of study partners, technical support, or the months of preparation that had actually made her success possible. Reading that interview triggered something inside me that I hadn't felt during the weeks of disappointment and confusion following her dismissal. Instead of the familiar ache of rejection, I felt a surge of indignation at how completely she'd erased my contribution to her achievement. This wasn't just about romantic feelings anymore. It was about professional respect and basic honesty about how her success had actually been accomplished. I decided to reach out to Jessica directly, not to resurrect our personal relationship, but to address the factual inaccuracies in her public statements about her licensing preparation. When I called her office at Hill Country Realty, the receptionist informed me that Jessica was in client meetings all day, but could probably return my call sometime the following week. The casual dismissal in that response, the implication that my concern wasn't urgent enough to interrupt her real estate activities, crystallized exactly how my status had changed in her world. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even myself. Instead of waiting for Jessica to potentially return my call, I began documenting everything I'd contributed to her licensing success. I compiled screenshots of the study app I'd built specifically for her needs, showing the hundreds of practice questions I'd researched and programmed. I gathered emails where she'd praised my technical assistance and credited my tools with helping her understand complex real estate concepts. I organized timestamps and chat logs that clearly demonstrated the scope and duration of my involvement in her preparation process. Initially, I told myself this documentation was simply for my own clarity, a way to validate that my contributions had been real and significant, despite Jessica's public narrative suggesting otherwise. But as I assembled the evidence of our 8-month collaboration, I began to see patterns that revealed just how deliberately she'd been building her professional network. While using my support as a foundation for her confidence and knowledge, the most damning discovery came when I reviewed the progression of her social media posts throughout our study period. Early photos showed her surrounded by textbooks and looking genuinely overwhelmed by the complexity of real estate law and market analysis. But gradually, the posts shifted to show her at networking events, property tours, and industry conferences, always looking poised and knowledgeable as she discussed concepts I'd spent hours helping her master just days before.
Odd what?
What made this particularly infuriating was realizing how she'd been leveraging my technical skills to impress Brad and his colleagues without ever acknowledging the source of her sudden proficiency with digital marketing tools and data analysis. I'd taught her to use property valuation software, helped her create professional-looking market reports, shown her how to analyze demographic trends using online databases. She'd been presenting these skills as natural talents during her networking activities, building her reputation as a tech-savvy newcomer to the real estate industry. I confronted this reality during a particularly sleepless night when I found myself obsessively reviewing every interaction we'd shared, looking for signs of the calculated manipulation I now suspected had been happening all along. The romantic dinners where she'd seemed so grateful for my help took on a different meaning when I realized she'd been pumping me for information about emerging technology trends that could give her an edge in real estate marketing. The cozy evenings at my apartment, which I'd interpreted as quality time together, had actually been efficient ways for her to access my expertise without the formal constraints of hiring a professional consultant. My breaking point came when I discovered that Jessica had been sharing some of the proprietary tools I'd developed specifically for her use with other agents at Hill Country Realty. A mutual acquaintance who worked in Austin's tech sector mentioned seeing real estate presentations that featured digital analysis methods suspiciously similar to the systems I'd created for Jessica's exam preparation. When I investigated further, I found that she'd essentially open-sourced my work without permission or attribution, using my innovations to build goodwill with her new colleagues. The betrayal felt complete when I realized that not only had Jessica discarded our personal relationship and erased my contribution to her licensing success, but she was also actively profiting from my intellectual property without any acknowledgement or compensation. The study app I'd spent months perfecting had apparently been reverse-engineered and adapted for use by other agents at her firm. The market analysis templates I'd designed specifically for her learning style were now being used to impress potential clients with Hill Country Realty's technological sophistication. For the first time since her licensing ceremony, I felt genuinely angry rather than just hurt and confused. This wasn't about romantic disappointment anymore. It was about professional theft and public misrepresentation of facts that could be easily documented and verified. Jessica had crossed a line from personal betrayal into professional misconduct, and I found myself no longer willing to accept her narrative about our collaboration. I began researching intellectual property rights related to custom software development, curious about what legal protections might exist for the tools I'd created for Jessica's use. While the legal aspects seemed complicated and potentially expensive to pursue, the research process helped me understand that I had legitimate grievances beyond just personal hurt feelings. Jessica's appropriation of my work wasn't just emotionally devastating. It was potentially actionable misconduct that violated basic professional ethics. More importantly, I started recognizing how systematically Jessica had manipulated not just me, but potentially other people who had supported her career development. The article in Austin Business Journal suggested she'd received mentorship from multiple industry professionals. But I began wondering how many of them had provided assistance that she'd later minimized or misrepresented to enhance her own image as a naturally gifted newcomer to real estate. My perspective shifted dramatically when I stopped viewing myself as a rejected romantic partner and started seeing myself as someone who had been professionally exploited by someone with a pattern of taking credit for collaborative achievements. This reframing gave me a sense of purpose and clarity that had been missing during the weeks of confusion and self-doubt following her dismissal from my life. I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I was going to publicly correct the record about Jessica's licensing preparation, not out of spite or revenge, but out of respect for truth and professional integrity. She wanted to build her real estate career on a foundation of misrepresented achievements and appropriated innovations. She would have to do so while the actual facts were available for anyone interested in verifying her claims. The transformation, from heartbroken supporter to determined truth teller, felt empowering in ways I hadn't expected. Instead of waiting passively for Jessica to acknowledge my contributions or return my calls, I was taking control of the narrative and ensuring that accurate information would be available to counteract her revisionist version of events. 4. The first time since her licensing ceremony, I felt like I had agency in this situation rather than just being a victim of her calculated indifference. Jessica might have moved on to more valuable professional relationships, but she wouldn't be able to completely erase the evidence of how her success had actually been achieved. The documentation I'd compiled told a very different story than the one she'd been sharing with Austin's real estate community, and I was no longer willing to let her version go unchallenged. The opportunity to set the record straight came sooner than I expected. Austin Tech Weekly, a publication that covered the intersection of technology and local business, reached out to me after hearing about innovative real estate tools being used by Hill Country Realty. The journalist Amanda Chen had been researching digital transformation in Austin's property market and wanted to interview the developer behind what she called revolutionary study and analysis applications that are changing how new agents prepare for licensing and serve clients. I agreed to meet Amanda at a coffee shop in East Austin, bringing with me a comprehensive portfolio documenting every aspect of the tools I'd developed for Jessica's licensing preparation. As I laid out screenshots, code samples, and development timelines, Amanda's eyes widened with genuine interest in the technical innovation I'd created. She asked detailed questions about the algorithms I'd used for property valuation analysis, the user interface design principles that made complex real estate concepts accessible, and the data integration methods that allowed seamless market trend analysis. What Amanda found most fascinating was the timeline of development, which clearly showed that these tools had been created months before Jessica joined Hill Country Realty. The metadata from my code repositories, the email timestamps from Jessica's, feedback during the development process, and the documented evolution of features based on her specific learning needs painted a picture that contradicted everything she'd told the Austin Business Journal about her preparation methods. During our 2-hour conversation, Amanda's journalism instincts began connecting dots that went far beyond just intellectual property attribution. She asked probing questions about how Jessica had transitioned from struggling with basic real estate concepts too confidently discussing advanced market analysis techniques in such a short time frame. When I showed her the progression of Jessica's social media posts, Amanda immediately recognized the narrative inconsistencies that had taken me weeks to fully understand. I provided Amanda with documented evidence of every claim I made, from the original conversations where Jessica had asked for my help to the final versions of software that were now apparently being used throughout Hill Country Realty. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously organized, leaving no room for misinterpretation about the timeline of development or the scope of my contribution to Jessica's success. Amanda's investigation expanded beyond just my story when she began reaching out to other technology professionals in Austin who had worked with real estate firms. What she discovered was a pattern of established agents taking credit for innovations developed by their technical contacts, particularly when those contacts were younger professionals without established reputations in the real estate industry. The article Amanda published 2 weeks later was more comprehensive than I had anticipated. Titled, "The Hidden Developers Behind Austin's Real Estate Tech Revolution." It featured my story prominently, while also exposing similar situations involving other technology professionals whose work had been appropriated by agents seeking to enhance their digital marketing credentials. The piece included side-by-side comparisons of Jessica's public statements about her licensing preparation with documented evidence of the actual development timeline for the tools she'd been credited with inspiring. Amanda had even interviewed former classmates from Jessica's licensing courses, several of whom remembered her struggling with basic concepts, until suddenly demonstrating advanced analytical skills that seemed to appear overnight. Most damaging to Jessica's credibility were the screenshots Amanda published showing how the study app, developed specifically for real estate licensing, had been rebranded and was now being marketed by Hill Country Realty as an exclusive tool they'd developed in-house for training new agents. The code analysis clearly showed that the underlying architecture was identical to my original application, with only superficial design changes to remove my branding and attribution. The response to Amanda's article was immediate and widespread. Throughout Austin's real estate community, multiple agents came forward with their own stories of technical support they'd received from developers who had never been publicly acknowledged for their contributions. Industry forums buzzed with discussions about ethical standards for crediting collaborative work and the importance of accurate attribution in professional development. Hill Country Realty found themselves in an extremely uncomfortable position. As other publications picked up Amanda's story and began investigating their claims about in-house technology development, the firm's marketing materials, which had prominently featured their innovative digital tools as a competitive advantage, suddenly looked like false advertising when the actual development timeline became public knowledge. Jessica's response to the article was a carefully worded statement, claiming that any misunderstanding about the development of her study tools had been unintentional, that she had always intended to acknowledge all contributors to her success, and that she welcomed the opportunity to set the record straight about collaborative efforts that had supported her licensing preparation. But Jessica's damage control efforts were undermined when Amanda published a follow-up piece that included email exchanges between Jessica and Hill Country Realty's marketing department. The emails clearly showed Jessica actively participating in the rebranding of my tools as proprietary firm innovations, even providing specific talking points about how these applications demonstrated the firm's commitment to cutting-edge technology in real estate services. The most devastating revelation came when Amanda obtained internal Hill Country Realty documents showing that the firm had been using my applications to win new client contracts by demonstrating their supposed technological superiority over competitors. Several high-value clients had specifically chosen Hill Country Realty because of the impressive digital analysis capabilities that Jessica had presented during their initial consultations. Capabilities that were entirely based on tools I had developed for her personal use. The scandal expanded beyond just Jessica when other Hill Country Realty agents were forced to acknowledge that they had been using similar tools, developed by technical contacts who had never been compensated or credited for their work. The pattern revealed a systematic exploitation of Austin's tech community by real estate professionals who were more interested in appearing innovative than actually investing in legitimate technology development. Brad, who had been prominently featured in Jessica's success story, suddenly found himself trying to distance his reputation from the emerging scandal. His own claims about mentoring Jessica through advanced market analysis techniques looked ridiculous when it became clear that she had been relying entirely on my applications to generate the insights that had impressed him and their colleagues. The Austin Board of Realtors announced they would be reviewing ethical guidelines related to technology attribution and intellectual property rights, citing the need for clear standards about how real estate professionals should acknowledge collaborative work that contributes to their business success. Jessica's carefully constructed image as a naturally gifted newcomer to luxury real estate began crumbling as more details emerged about the extent to which her early success had been built on appropriated innovations. Potential clients who had been impressed by her technological sophistication began questioning whether she actually possessed the skills she had claimed during their initial consultations. The most satisfying aspect of the entire situation was watching Jessica scramble to rebuild her credibility, while the documented evidence of her representations remained permanently available through Amanda's published articles. Every networking event she attended, every client presentation she made, and every professional relationship she tried to cultivate now occurred in the context of public knowledge about how she had achieved her initial success in the real estate industry. For the first time since her licensing ceremony, I felt like the balance of power had shifted in my favor. Jessica could no longer control the narrative about our collaboration or dismiss my contributions as insignificant. The evidence spoke for itself, and her attempts to minimize or reframe the situation only drew more attention to the documented timeline of events that contradicted her public statements. 6 months after Amanda's articles destroyed Jessica's credibility in Austin's real estate scene, I was sitting in a gleaming conference room in Seattle, signing a contract to lead the technology development team for a national real estate platform. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jessica's theft of my innovations had inadvertently launched my career in exactly the industry she'd tried to exclude me from. Except now, I was positioned far above anything she could ever achieve. It's a job offer had come through connections I'd made after. Amanda's articles brought my work to the attention of legitimate technology companies. Unlike Jessica's superficial networking events, these were conversations with people who understood the actual value of innovative development and wanted to compensate me appropriately for skills that could transform entire industries. My new role involved creating digital tools for real estate professionals across multiple markets. With a starting salary that exceeded what most luxury agents in Austin earned in their best years, the company had specifically recruited me because of the comprehensive applications I developed independently. Applications that Jessica had tried to claim as collaborative efforts with Hill Country Realty. During my final week in Austin, I received an unexpected phone call from Jessica. Her voice sounded strained and desperate as she asked if we could meet to discuss what she called a mutually beneficial business opportunity. She explained that Hill Country Realty was facing serious credibility issues following the technology attribution scandal, and several clients had specifically asked whether they could work with the actual developer of the analytical tools they'd been impressed by during their initial consultations. I agreed to meet Jessica at a neutral location, curious about what she thought she could possibly offer me at this point. When she arrived at the coffee shop, I barely recognized the confident woman who had dismissed me after her licensing ceremony. She looked exhausted and anxious, wearing a professional outfit that seemed slightly too large, as if she'd lost weight from stress. Jessica's proposition was both pathetic and revealing about how completely she misunderstood the situation. She suggested that we could form a partnership where I would provide ongoing technical support for her real estate business while she handled client relationships and property transactions. She offered to split commissions with me and even suggested that we could market ourselves as a team that combined traditional real estate expertise with cutting-edge technology solutions. What made her offer particularly insulting was how she presented it as if she were doing me a favor by including me in her business plans. She spoke about the valuable industry connections she'd maintained despite the recent scandal, about her established reputation with luxury property developers, and about the opportunities she could provide for me to build credibility in Austin's real estate market. I listened to her entire pitch without interruption, watching her become increasingly animated as she described the potential success we could achieve together. She seemed genuinely convinced that I would be grateful for the chance to salvage our professional relationship, that my technical skills combined with her industry experience would create an unstoppable partnership in Austin's competitive real estate landscape. When Jessica finished her presentation, calmly informed her that I'd already accepted a position with a Seattle-based company that would be paying me more than she could earn in several years of real estate commissions. I explained that my career had advanced far beyond anything she could offer, that I was moving into a role where I would be developing technology solutions for thousands of real estate professionals rather than supporting the goals of someone who had already demonstrated her willingness to exploit collaborative relationships. The shock on Jessica's face was immediate and complete. She'd apparently assumed that I was still the same person who had devoted 8 months to supporting her goals without expecting anything in return. The reality that I had moved on to opportunities that made her offer irrelevant seemed to catch her completely off guard. Jessica's desperation became obvious as she began backtracking on her previous statements about our collaboration. She claimed that she had always intended to give me proper credit for the tools I'd developed. The attribution issues had been misunderstandings created by Hill Country Realty's marketing department that she had been planning to reach out to correct the record even before the scandal became public. Found myself completely unmoved by her attempts at damage control. The woman who had once made me feel inferior and disposable was now scrambling to convince me that she valued my contributions. But her desperation only highlighted how dramatically our positions had reversed. Where she had once held all the power in our relationship, I now had career opportunities and financial security that put me completely beyond her influence. When Jessica realized that her partnership offer wouldn't work, she shifted to what appeared to be her backup plan, asking if I would be willing to provide a statement supporting her version of events during our collaboration. She suggested that a few positive comments from me about our working relationship might help repair some of the reputational damage she'd suffered following Amanda's investigation. My response was brief and definitive. I told Jessica that I had no interest in helping rehabilitate her reputation. She would need to rebuild her credibility through her own honest efforts rather than relying on support from people she had previously exploited. I wished her luck with her real estate career and made it clear that our conversation was the last interaction we would ever have. The flight to Seattle represented more than just a geographical relocation. It was the final step in my transformation. From someone who had defined his worth through other people's success to someone who understood his own value and refused to accept less than he deserved. Jessica's betrayal had inadvertently taught me lessons about self-respect and professional boundaries that I might never have learned otherwise. As the plane lifted off from Austin, I looked down at the city where I'd spent 8 months supporting someone else's dreams while neglecting my own potential. The real estate market that had seemed so exclusive and intimidating when Jessica was pursuing her license now looked like just another industry where genuine innovation and integrity would always triumph over superficial networking and borrowed credibility. My new life in Seattle was everything I'd never known I wanted. Challenging work with colleagues who respected my expertise. Financial compensation that reflected my actual contributions, and the freedom to pursue opportunities without worrying about whether they would benefit someone who saw me as disposable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.